Yo, what up guys, it's Renan, and I'm here and I've been testing out a lot of the rogue sub and assassination builds, which are really cool. I got this guy trying to duel me, and I do really like the talents that they've had in this game, and I do think that there's a good amount of wiggle room. Honestly, I wish there were a little bit more options for your damage, because as you can tell from these trees, I mean, usually, and this goes for the other specs as well, one side of the tree is basically pure AoE, so all of these are not going to be used for a lot of different content, so you can pretty much count one side of the talents out of the equation. And if you go to the class tree, generally speaking, they're pretty linear. As you can see here, there's just a straight line to get down to some of the big hitters like Echoing Reprimand, Shadow Dance. Thistletease, actually, I don't know if it's really good. I actually want to test out to see if the damage of it is really good, but as you can see, to get to these, you kind of have to go down this line, and that really kind of narrows down the potential builds you can have, which I guess from a design standpoint, it is pretty good, because if you were able to get a ton of these talents without having to go down a linear pathway, then balancing would be really hard, and I feel like there'd be a lot of weird builds coming out that would just be one-shotting people, which actually still happens here on the beta. And that does bring me up to another point, that I do feel like that they're trying to balance out the game around PvE, and a lot of the PvP aspects of the game are left kind of in the out on the side, and there's a lot of balancing issues in the beta, which I found. A few of those being that things like Demon Hunter, Shaman, Shadow Priest, Warlock, all these classes have incredible healing and survivability, to the point where it can be pretty much borderline impossible to kill them unless you're one of these top specs. And Holy DK kind of gets a mention here too, but they do have a few weaknesses which you can exploit, whereas things like Demon Hunter, Shadow Priest, Warlock, Shaman are just going to heal up to full pretty much no matter what. And I do think that's a bit annoying, a bit imbalanced, and from a 1v1 standpoint, you're pretty much never going to kill them outside of maybe a Demon Hunter if you get lucky, but the other specs are going to be pretty much unkillable for a lot of different people, especially Rogue. I found Shadow Priest, Warlock, and Shaman borderline impossible if they have a good build, especially if they take a lot of the healing talents in their tree, because then they become a healer and basically full heal instantly over and over and over again. Warlock and Shaman are even worse than Shadow Priest, but Shadow Priest is up there for being really bad. But this video is about Rogue, not about my complaints about some of the design they've had in this game. And I want to go over a couple of the cool things about Rogue right now, and that is the kind of variety on the way you can build your character. And I do think that they're functionally the same in which how you play them. So for example, with this current build I have right now, I have Flagellation and Echoing Reprimand, which both are just trying to get big eviscerates, and pretty much every other build that you're going to make is going to be coming down to trying to get big eviscerates. With Echoing Reprimand, you're going to be trying to get those 7 combo point eviscerates, and if you go something like Cold Blood and Mark for Death, you're going to do a Mark for Death Cold Blood eviscerate with finality. So I do think that the functionality of the class is going to be really similar. I mean, we're playing a rogue, so the talents are going to change up the class all too much, but it does allow you to have a couple different types of play styles. If you don't want to have another button on your bar, with Echoing Reprimand, you could try to do a Cold Blood build, which does take away your slice and dice healing, but you do get things like the Deadly Precision, which increases your critical strike chance of your Shadow Dance, gives you Vigor, which is a pretty good for sub rogue, and then you get Lethality and then Cold Blood, instead of going having the healing from slice and dice, the increased range, and obviously Echoing Reprimand. And from what I've been testing, I actually think that this build that I found here, that Echoing Reprimand and Flagellation, are going to be probably higher damage than going with Flagellation and Cold Blood, primarily because Echoing Reprimand gives you a lot more 7 combo point eviscerates, whereas Cold Blood doesn't really. The big problem with Cold Blood that I found is that you'll Cold Blood eviscerate after your first eviscerate, so you'll eviscerate, Mark for Death, Cold Blood, eviscerate again, but the problem I found is that the shadow damage that comes off of your eviscerate, and if you don't know, eviscerate will hit twice every time you use it, one time for physical damage, and then I don't know what it is, like 50% of that physical damage will be converted into shadow damage and then hit the target as well. But the cold blade will only affect, or cold blood rather, will only affect the first cast of it. So only the physical damage portion of the attack is going to be doing a crit, and then the shadow damage isn't guaranteed a crit. I wish that cold blood would make eviscerate and the shadow damage part of eviscerate both crit, because then I think it'd be really, really strong. But because it doesn't work like that, I think that it might be better to go Echoing Reprimand. I do want to test it out a bit more to go with cold blood and test it out a bit just to see like what I can do with that. But anyway, like there is different builds that are actually really viable that you're going to run. And I think in certain PvP things, like in, you know, you might want to take Invigorating Shadow Dust, which would make you eventually get the Rotten, which again does have a lot of potential here. I haven't been doing a lot of testing with the Rotten. I've been kind of messing around with the right side of the tree, but there are builds that I have, and there was apparently a rank 1 rogue who came up with this build, which is kind of a one-shot, and I think it's more of a cheese build with Dagger in the Dark, which increases your Shadow Strike damage. So basically, you sap somebody, you pop Symbols of Death, which increases your damage basically by 50% on top of another, what is that, 50% from Dagger in the Dark. And what you're trying to do is basically get a one-shot with Shadow Blades and a Shadow Strike in the opener. Do I think it's all too viable for Arena? Maybe. But I do think that, obviously, as you can tell, this might be a more competitive build, primarily because of Invigorating Shadow Dust, which a lot of rogues are going to be going for. But there are going to be a lot of experimentation. For example, if the build I'm running here with Flagellation and Finality do a lot of damage, then maybe rogues are going to be opting out of Invigorating Shadow Dust in order to just do raw damage. But there's going to be a lot more testing to be done and a lot more high-rated arenas, which you can't really get right now. But I do think that there is a good variety. Now, what do I think they could change for Rogue? I think that the actual subtlety tree is pretty good. Some of the things I don't like are pretty much, a lot of these are mandatory. So if you cut out all the AoE abilities here on the right, you just cut all those out. There isn't that much variety in this build here. You know, I wish there was a bit more choice, right? You either go down the right side of the tree and get all of these, or you go down the left side of the tree and get all of these, right? So there's only like maybe one to like maybe 4 builds you can run, and they're pretty much the same in a lot of ways because you're taking these same talents. And I do wish there was a bit more choice for Rogue, and I know that this is a Rogue issue. Let me see if I can inspect somebody. Like if I go over to the Evokers, right? Because they're so different in terms of they have 2 different types of classes in them. And like they have Preservation, which is a healer spec, and then they have Devastation, which is the damage spec. So what that comes down to is that they have a lot of choice here, which you can see right here. Like one side of the tree might be damage, and then the other side will be healing, which gives them a nice way to kind of balance out. Do I want more damage? Do I want more healing? Do I want utility? And it adds a lot of variety into the spec and how you play. And the same thing goes for Shaman, because I know that for Shaman, you know, you could go down the restoration part of the tree and basically be like an off healer. And then the other side of the tree will give you more utility, more damage, like Hex and whatnot. So there is a lot more variety, I feel like, with other hybrid type classes, which I think is what makes them really strong at the moment. Like I said earlier, a lot of the hybrid classes are kind of OP. And it's because they have a lot of choice. And I'm assuming it is really hard to balance that because of all the choices that they have, but I'm sure that they're going to have a whole lot of fun because their builds are going to be really different. Whereas with Rogue, like I talked about earlier, it is pretty linear. You have the middle tree, the left tree, and then the right tree. And this can really be broken down to the middle tree is Outlaw, the left tree is for Assassination, and then the right tree is for Subtlety. But the variety you have isn't that much. I think the most variety you have is up in the top, but even then, I think the talents up here are too situational and are not needed depending on your spec. So for example, with Subtlety, we don't have a whole lot of energy issues, so we don't have to opt into things like rushed setup. We don't have to get things like gouge because we have a lot of stuns already, although I think gouge would have a lot of value, don't get me wrong, and it might be the go-to for a lot of PvPers, but I do think there are a lot of talents in here that aren't needed, and so the builds you can do are kind of stuck into are kind of like cut and dry, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I do wish there was a bit more variety, but for what we have, I do think that there is some cool different builds you can go down. Like I said, you can go down the Echoing Reprimand, or you can get Cold Blood. And I do think this very left tree with Thistletea isn't needed, although I do think it could be cool because I know that Thistletea gives mastery. There is maybe some potential, and I'm going to try it out. Maybe I'll come up with a new build that uses Thistletea with the 20% mastery bonus, which, if you don't know, will, I think, pretty much give rogues an extra 20% damage on their combo point abilities. So your ruptures, your eviscerates, things of that nature are going to be doing like 20% more damage, depending on how much mastery you have, I think. But again, like I said, like if you're a subtlety rogue, you're pretty much going to want to go down the right tree every single freaking time. If you're a combat rogue or an outlaw rogue, you're probably going to want to go down this tree and get Echoing Reprimand because you're going to be keeping Slice and Dice up a lot. And then if you're an assassination rogue, you're going to go down this left tree because you're going to be having energy issues a lot of the time and want things that increase your poison damage, maybe give you leech because you're going to be in combat a lot and you're not running as much as a rogue, like a subtlety rogue, and then you can get Sylphate and then Thistletea to kind of even out your energy issues. So like I said, you can kind of see the philosophy they went with, but I do think I wish they would give more variety. But there is a bit, not to say that there isn't variety, I just want a little bit more of it. Just to show off my builds now, I know I've been talking a lot, but I want to showcase some of the builds I've made and how they play out. So on the screen, I'm going to be showing a couple of these duels or some damage, one shot that people let me get on them, so you can kind of see how much damage rogues are doing. And outside of those OP specs, I do think rogue has a really good chance in the arena and in duels, but I do think they need to tune down Warlock and Shadow Priest and Shaman. Shaman can one-shot, Warlocks are unkillable and do a crap load of damage, and the same goes for Shadow Priest. And I hope they tune down their survivability. Maybe they can keep their damage, but Warlocks shield too much, heal too much, and they have so many ways to survive a go. Same thing for Shadow Priest and Enhancement Shaman. But hopefully you enjoyed the video, and the different duels that I'm showing on the screen can kind of show you the potential of the subtlety rogue at the moment. And I will be coming out with an assassination rogue review, but as of right now, I do think that subtlety rogue is in a really good place, especially because we have things like Soothing Darkness, which heal us for 30% of our HP for every vanish or shadow dance that we get into. So we do have a bit of survivability now, and we have a lot of damage, as you can probably see on the screen right now. But that'll be it for this video talking about the subtlety rogue. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.